Fix it, and I'm yours." Vanessa Whitmore said it with a smirk. The whole boardroom erupted in laughter. 26 engineers, 6 executives, a billion-dollar prototype sitting dead on the floor behind them, and the man they were all laughing at, a black maintenance worker in a worn gray uniform, reached into his chest pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and laid it flat on the conference table without saying a single word. The laughter died instantly. It was a medical bill, $94,000. His 6-year-old daughter's name was at the top. He looked straight at the CEO, then put it in writing. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because the man they had just mocked had called her bluff in front of everyone. What city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. Subscribe and never miss what comes next. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Not 4:45. Not 5:00. 4:47, because that was the exact amount of time Darius Coleman needed to do everything that had to be done before the sun came up, calculated down to the minute over 3 years of doing it alone. He was already awake. He'd been lying on his back in the dark for 11 minutes, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked faintly like a handprint, listening to the sound of his daughter breathing through the baby monitor on the nightstand. Maya was 6 years old. She breathed a little louder than most kids her age, a soft, slightly labored sound that most parents would never notice. Darius noticed it every single night. He'd been noticing it for 14 months, ever since the pediatric cardiologist at St. Marcus Children's Hospital sat across from him in a beige office with motivational posters on the walls, and told him in the careful, practiced way that doctors deliver news they've delivered 100 times before, that Maya had a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The doctor had used a lot of words after that. Darius had only heard a few of them: progressive, monitoring, medication, eventual intervention. That last word, intervention, was a clean medical way of saying surgery. A surgery that cost money. Darius Coleman did not have, and could not pretend he was going to have anytime soon. He reached over and silenced the alarm before the second buzz, swung his legs to the floor, and stood up in one movement. The hardwood was cold against his bare feet. He didn't flinch. He'd been getting up in cold rooms his whole life. The kitchen light flickered once before it caught the ballast in the fluorescent fixture had been dying for 6 weeks, and he hadn't had time to replace it. He filled the pot with water, measured the coffee by memory, and turned the burner on under the pan he'd already rinsed the night before. Eggs, toast, half a banana cut into pieces because Maya wouldn't eat a whole one, but would always eat the half if he cut it into coins and arranged them in a circle on her plate. He'd learned that by accident 8 months ago and hadn't deviated from it since. By 5:15, the apartment smelled like coffee and warm bread. By 5:22, he had her lunch-packed turkey sandwich on whole wheat apple slices, a small bag of pretzels, and a handwritten note folded into a triangle, the way she liked, tucked under the sandwich so she'd find it when she opened the bag. He'd been putting notes in her lunch since she started kindergarten. He never knew if she read them. He kept writing them anyway. At 5:31, he stood in the doorway of her room. Maya was curled on her side, one arm wrapped around a stuffed rabbit named Gerald that was missing one eye and had a faded patch on its left ear where she'd chewed it as a baby. Her breathing was steady, slightly loud. He stood there for exactly 90 seconds. He'd counted it once and never stopped, just watching her chest rise and fall. Then he went to get dressed. The gray work shirt hung on the back of the bathroom door. It had his name stitched in navy red above the left breast pocket. Darius, in the blocky functional font that maintenance uniforms always use, the kind of lettering designed to be readable, not personal. He'd owned 4 of these shirts at one point. Now he had 2. He rotated them. He kept them clean. Hunt put it on the same way he always did. Left arm first, then right, then 2 buttons from the bottom up, because that kept the collar from pulling. He'd worked out the mechanics of every routine in his life, the same way he'd worked out everything else in his life, through observation, repetition, and a relentless need to find the most efficient path from A to B. He was at his core an engineer. He had been since he was 9 years old, and took apart his mother's broken washing machine in the basement of their house in Baltimore, figured out that the pump motor's capacitor had failed, and after 3 trips to the hardware store and $17 of his own lawn mowing money, fixed it himself. His mother had cried. Not because she was sad, because nobody had ever fixed anything in that house before. Things broke and stayed broken. That was just the way things were. Darius decided early on that things didn't have to stay broken. That decision shaped everything that came after. He dropped Maya at school at 7:15. She went in without looking back. She was a confident kid, always had been, even before she understood what confidence was. But she paused at the door and turned around once. Daddy. Yeah, baby. Can we have the noodles tonight, the flat ones? Pappardelle. Yeah, those. I'll see what I can do. She nodded like a tiny executive approving a proposal, pushed through the door, and was gone. He sat in the car for a moment after she disappeared. The engine was running. The heat was on. He had exactly 43 minutes before he needed to clock in at Whitmore Technologies, and the drive was 26 minutes on a good traffic day. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the folded piece of paper he'd been carrying for 9 days. It was a statement from Maya's insurance provider. He didn't need to unfold it to remember what it said. He'd read it enough times that the words had arranged themselves permanently in the back of his mind, surfacing at random moments throughout the day, like an intrusive notification he couldn't dismiss. Claim denied. Procedure classified as elective. Coverage not applicable under current plan terms. Elective. That's what they called a surgery that might save his daughter's heart. Elective. He folded the paper back up, put it in his pocket, put the car in drive. Whitmore Technologies occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta that caught the morning light in a way that made it look like it was always on fire. From the outside, it was exactly the kind of building that was designed to make you feel small before you walked through the door, all vertical lines and reflective surface a monument to its own importance. Darius parked in the lower level of the structure across the street, in the section designated for non-executive staff, which was 3 levels underground and smelled like exhaust and cement. He took the service elevator up to the loading dock badged in through the maintenance entrance and picked up his work order for the day from the board in the back room. The board was run by a man named Gerald Hodges, maintenance supervisor, 17 years with the company, a man who managed the department with the quiet, practiced authority of someone who had long ago stopped caring what anyone above him thought, and had instead devoted himself entirely to making sure his small corner of the building ran without incident. Gerald was a compact black man in his late 50s, with a gray mustache and reading glasses he kept on a chain around his neck. Coleman. Gerald didn't look up from his clipboard. 3rd floor HVAC unit is cycling weird again. Start there. Then I've got you on the generator inspection in the sub-basement. And there's a light bank out on 14 that facilities hasn't touched in 4 days because apparently 14 is too important for them to deal with. HVAC first. HVAC first. Gerald looked up, studied him for a second. You eat this morning. Coffee. That's not eating. I'll eat at lunch. Gerald looked at him the way older men look at younger ones when they recognize a particular kind of exhaustion, not the kind that comes from one bad night, but the kind that has been accumulating for years. He didn't push it. He handed Darius the clipboard. 14's got some kind of important meeting this afternoon. Try to get the lights done before noon. I'll get it done. He always did. The 14th floor was where the executive suite lived. Darius had been up there dozens of times over the past 2 years, fixing lights, adjusting the climate control, replacing a ceiling panel after a leak in the floor above, rewiring an outlet that had been incorrectly installed during the last renovation. He knew every corner of that floor the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not because he was supposed to be there, but because something always needed fixing, and he was the one who fixed it. The light bank on 14 was a panel of recessed LED fixtures in the main corridor outside the primary conference room. He had the replacement driver units in his bag before he'd even reached the elevator. He'd diagnosed the likely failure mode from the work order description and pulled the right parts without needing to investigate first. This was habit. This was reflex. He was on a 6-foot ladder replacing the second driver when he heard the voices coming from inside the conference room. The door was ajar. Not open, just slightly not closed. The way doors sometimes are in big buildings where the frames have settled unevenly over the years. He wasn't trying to listen. He simply couldn't not hear. Running the diagnostic again isn't going to tell us anything we don't already know. The machine is failing at stage 4 of the compression cycle, every single time. Same point, same result. We've replaced the stage 4 compressor twice and it's still doing it. That was a man's voice, clipped, defensive. Then the compressor isn't the problem. A woman's voice, controlled, precise, with an edge underneath it that suggested she was holding herself very still because the alternative was something none of them wanted to see. Which means either your diagnosis is wrong or there's a secondary variable nobody has identified. With respect, Ms. Whitmore, we've run every diagnostic available, and yet the machine is still broken, Dr. Harrington. So one of those two things must be true. Silence. Darius paused with the driver unit in his hand. Stage 4 compression cycle. Consistent failure point. Compressor replaced twice. His hands kept working muscle memory, handling the physical task, while the part of his brain that never entirely powered down started pulling up the relevant architecture. He'd never worked on a Whitmore prototype, but he'd worked on pressurized systems. He'd designed them years ago in a different life. He knew what caused consistent failure at a single point in a compression sequence when component replacement hadn't resolved it. He knew it wasn't the compressor. He finished the second driver, moved the ladder 6 feet down the corridor, and started on the third. Inside the conference room. The meeting had been going for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and Vanessa Whitmore was running out of patience in a very controlled, very deliberate way, the way she ran out of everything with full awareness of exactly how much she had left and exactly how long it would take to exhaust it. She was 38 years old. She had built Whitmore Technologies from a concept sketched on a legal pad in her apartment into a company valued at $1.4 billion, and she had done it in 11 years, which was, as several publications had noted, and she had never once mentioned herself faster than almost anyone else had ever done anything comparable. She was precise. She was demanding. She was, by her own admission, not easy to work for, because she expected from other people the same thing she expected from herself, which was everything all the time without exception. The machine in the adjoining laboratory, officially designated the Vortex 7 compression prototype, was her most important project. It was the technology that was supposed to move her company from impressive to transformative, from a company with a good valuation to a company that changed the way industrial systems worked globally. She had $43 million in investor funding contingent on a successful demonstration in 11 days. She had a team of 12 engineers, 4 of whom had doctorates, all of whom had been working on this problem for 3 weeks, and none of whom had solved it. She looked at the 12 people sitting around her conference table. Tell me what you haven't tried. Dr. Elliot Harrington, Chief of Engineering, 51 years old, Stanford PhD, a man who wore his credentials the way some men wore their watches, visibly, and at all times straightened in his chair. We've been thorough, Vanessa. The diagnostic protocols we're using are industry standard. The components are within spec. There is no mechanical explanation for the failure pattern we're seeing. There is always a mechanical explanation. She let that sit for a moment. You're just not finding it. Harrington's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being told in front of his team that he was failing at his job. He had worked at Whitmore for 6 years. He had built the engineering department she was now criticizing. He had on 3 separate occasions turned down offers from competitors at significantly higher compensation because he believed in the work they were doing here. He was also at this particular moment completely stumped, and that fact was eating him alive. What would you suggest then? I would suggest, Vanessa said, that we approach this from the outside in. We've been assuming the failure originates in the components. What if it originates in the architecture? What if the way the system is designed creates a condition that the components can't survive regardless of their individual quality? We've reviewed the design specs. And their sound. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the rest of the table. Nobody offered anything. She stood up. Take an hour. Come back with something different, or don't come back at all. She was standing in the hallway outside the conference room. her phone pressed to her ear, listening to her head of investor relations explain for the third time that Meridian Capital was not panicking, but was expressing concern and would appreciate a progress update by end of week, when she became aware of the maintenance worker on the ladder down the hall. She noticed him, the way she noticed most things that existed in her peripheral vision efficiently and without dwelling on it. He was black, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray uniform shirt with a name stitched above the pocket. He was replacing light fixtures with the focused, systematic efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and didn't need to think about it. She finished the call, said 3 sentences to her assistant about moving her 3 o'clock, and walked back toward the conference room. She was 4 steps from the door when the maintenance worker spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't turn around. He kept his hands on the fixture he was working on, and he spoke in a level, measured tone, like someone stating a fact they've already verified. "It's a resonance problem." Vanessa stopped. She turned around slowly. "I'm sorry." Now he turned. He was holding a small tool, a driver of some kind, and he looked at her with dark eyes that were calm, in a way that caught her off guard, because most people who spoke to her unexpectedly in hallways were not calm. They were nervous. They were performing. He was neither. "The machine you're trying to fix. The one that's failing at the same point every time, even after you replace the compressor." He paused. "It's not the compressor. It's not any single component. The architecture of the stage 4 sequence creates a resonance frequency when it hits a specific pressure threshold around the point where the compressor engages at full load. The resonance is being absorbed by the mounting framework, and it's transferring stress to the compressor housing at a rate that no compressor is going to survive regardless of how good it is. You're replacing parts that are failing because of a design problem. The parts aren't the problem." The hallway was very quiet. Vanessa stared at him. "How do you know what we're working on?" "The door was open, and I've worked on pressurized compression systems before. The failure pattern you described, consistent same-stage component replacement, doesn't fix it. That's a resonance signature. I recognized it." "You've worked on pressurized compression systems?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been old pain quickly controlled. "A different one." She held his gaze. He didn't look away. "What's your name?" "Darius Coleman." "How long have you worked here, Darius?" 2 years, 3 months. 2 years. She said it without inflection, but something behind her eyes was recalibrating. "And you've been fixing light bulbs?" "Mostly. Some HVAC, generator inspection, standard maintenance." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she turned back toward the conference room door. "Come in." He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "I'm on the clock for this repair job. I'll talk to Gerald." The conference room went quiet in a particular way when Darius walked in behind Vanessa. The way rooms go quiet when something unexpected enters them. The 12 engineers and executives around the table looked at the maintenance worker, the way people look at things that don't fit the category they've been assigned to, with a confusion that in some faces shifted quickly into something less generous. Vanessa didn't give them time to settle into whatever reaction they were forming. "This is Darius Coleman from Building Maintenance. He's going to share an observation about the machine. Everyone listen." She sat down. She gestured toward the head of the table, which was, and several people noticed this where she normally stood. Darius remained standing. He didn't reach for a chair. He looked at the table full of credentialed, expensive, well-dressed engineers, the way he looked at a broken machine with calm diagnostic attention. "The resonance problem," he said. He laid it out in 5 minutes. He didn't use academic language. He didn't hedge. He described the mechanical dynamic clearly, precisely, and completely, the way the stage 4 architecture created a natural frequency under full load compression, the way that frequency transmitted through the mounting framework, the specific stress concentration point that was destroying the compressor housing cycle after cycle. He explained how to identify it, a simple vibration measurement at specific points on the frame during a partial load test, and what the fix would look like, a damping modification to the mounting system that would interrupt the resonance transmission before it reached the compressor. When he finished, the room was quiet. For about 3 seconds. Then Dr. Harrington laughed. It wasn't a large laugh. It was the specific, precise laugh of a man who has identified something he considers beneath him and is letting the room know it. That's a very creative interpretation. His tone was gentle and contemptuous in equal measure. But resonance transmission in a system like this would have been identified in our simulation modeling. We ran the full acoustic and vibrational analysis suite before we built the prototype. What frequency range did you run? Harrington blinked. Standard range, per the design spec. The resonance I'm describing occurs at a frequency slightly outside the standard range for this class of system. It's generated by the interaction between the compression cycle timing and the mounting frame's natural frequency, which is specific to your prototype's exact dimensions and material composition. You wouldn't find it in a standard simulation because no standard simulation accounts for that specific variable. You'd only see it if you built it and ran it. A beat, which you did, and now it's breaking. Another beat. Another engineer younger sitting to Harrington's left, a man named Patrick Sears, who had the specific confidence of someone recently graduated from an excellent school, leaned forward. With respect, how would someone in a maintenance role even... Patrick. Vanessa's voice was quiet. It didn't need to be loud. That's not a question you need to ask out loud. Sears sat back. Harrington wasn't finished. I'm not dismissing the theory out of hand. I'm saying it contradicts our modeling data. And the solution he's proposing, a mounting damper modification, is not a trivial intervention. It would require a complete re-evaluation of the support structure and potentially weeks of additional testing. You have 11 days, Vanessa said, to implement an unproven fix suggested by someone who... Harrington stopped himself. By someone who... What? Her voice had changed. Not louder, colder. Harrington looked at Darius. Darius looked back. His face was completely still. Harrington looked back at Vanessa. By someone without the credentialing to be working on a project of this complexity. The room breathed again, as if it had been holding itself for those last few seconds. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. She looked at Harrington. Then she looked at the 11 other people around the table. Then she looked at Darius Coleman, standing at the head of the table in his gray work shirt, with his name stitched above the pocket, completely calm, completely still, completely certain. And something happened in her expression. A small shift barely visible, but Darius caught it because he had spent his whole life reading the small shifts in people's expressions, the micro adjustments that told you what was really happening before the words did. She believed him. She didn't know yet if she was right to, but she believed him. And Darius would never be entirely sure if it started as a real offer or as something she said in a moment of pressure. Something designed to expose him, or challenge him, or end the conversation. She said it. Fix it. She spread her hands slightly, a small, almost performative gesture. Fix it, and I'm yours. The room laughed. Not all of them, but most of them. The particular laughter of people who consider themselves intelligent and have just been given permission to express something they'd been suppressing, the absurdity, as they saw it, of this situation, this man, this claim. Darius didn't move. He didn't look at the people laughing. He looked at Vanessa Whitmore. She was still watching him. And she had stopped laughing before the laugh had fully formed because he wasn't backing down, and she had begun to understand in the 3 or 4 seconds between the words leaving her mouth. And now that she might have just said something she didn't fully mean in front of 12 witnesses. His voice was quiet, completely level, not angry, not embarrassed. Put it in writing. The laughter stopped. The way. Laughter stops when someone does something unexpected, not violently, not dramatically, but definitively. Like a light switch. Present, then not. Vanessa's eyes didn't move from his face. What? Whatever you just offered, put it in writing. He let a beat pass. Or don't. But if you're serious, I want it documented. I'll fix the machine. In exchange, I want one thing. What thing? He reached into the chest pocket of his gray work shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper worn along the crease from being folded and unfolded from being held and read and held again. He unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on the conference table, with both hands smoothing it with his palms, and pushed it toward her. It was a medical insurance denial letter. 4 paragraphs. Clinical language. The word elective used twice. Nobody spoke. Vanessa picked it up. She read it. She set it down. She looked at Darius. Your daughter. Her name is Maya. She's 6. She has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Her cardiologist says she needs a procedure in the next 18 months, ideally sooner. My insurance denied it. The out-of-pocket cost is $94,000. He said the number without flinching, without drama. The way you say numbers when you've been saying them to yourself for long enough that they've stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like facts. I'm not asking for the money as a gift. I'm asking for it as payment for a job. You fix this machine, you get your $43 million from your investors. I get enough to fix my daughter. That's the deal. The room was entirely silent. Dr. Harrington was not laughing anymore. Patrick Sears was looking at the table. Vanessa Whitmore was looking at Darius Coleman, and the expression on her face was something nobody in that room had seen before. Something complicated and unguarded, the expression of a person who has just collided with something true. She picked up the insurance letter. She set it down again. She looked at her head of legal, who was sitting against the wall. Marcus. Yes. Draft a performance agreement. Mr. Coleman successfully repairs the Vortex 7 prototype to demonstrated operational capacity. In exchange, the company covers the medical procedure for his dependent. Full cost, no cap. She paused. Have it ready in 2 hours. Marcus wrote something down. Vanessa looked back at Darius. You have until the end of the week, 5 days. I'll need access to the lab, unsupervised access, and I'll need the full spec documentation, original design files, not the modified versions. She nodded. He picked up the insurance letter, folded it back along its worn crease, put it back in his pocket. He looked around the room once, not defiantly, not triumphantly. Just looked. The same calm, diagnostic gaze. Then he walked back to the door. He paused in the doorway and looked back at Vanessa. I still have 2 more light fixtures to replace in the corridor. I'll come back this afternoon for the lab access. He left. The door stayed open slightly, the way doors do in old buildings where the frames have settled unevenly. Behind him, the room remained silent for another 4 or 5 seconds. Then Harrington exhaled slowly through his nose. You're not seriously considering? I'm seriously documenting it. Vanessa was already writing something on her legal pad. And you should be seriously considering what it means that a maintenance worker just diagnosed the problem your department has been failing to solve for 3 weeks. She looked up. Use the hour. Come back with something. And if you can't, I suggest you start hoping very hard that Mr. Coleman is as good as he just claimed to be. He finished the lights. He replaced the 3rd driver, moved the ladder, replaced the 4th, packed his tools into the canvas bag, folded the ladder, and carried everything back to the service elevator. He pressed the button for the basement. He rode down in silence. The elevator hummed. He leaned back against the wall of the elevator car and let his eyes close for exactly the length of time it took to reach the basement. In his pocket, the insurance letter sat in its worn crease. $94,000. 18 months, ideally sooner. Her name was Maya. She was 6 years old, and she breathed a little louder than other kids her age, and she liked flat noodles, and she put a stuffed rabbit named Gerald to bed every night with the same solemn care with which he put her to bed. He opened his eyes when the elevator stopped. He picked up his bag. He walked back to the maintenance room. Gerald looked up from his desk. All done. All done. Gerald studied him. Something in the way Darius had come through the door. Something happened up there. Darius set the bag down. He looked at Gerald for a moment. I think I might have a side project. Gerald raised an eyebrow. What kind of side project? Darius looked at the wall above Gerald's desk, where the work orders were pinned in neat rows day by day, the orderly accounting of things that were broken and needed to be fixed. The kind that matters. Gerald looked at him for another beat. Then he nodded slowly, the way older men nod when they understand something without needing it explained. Don't get yourself into something you can't finish. Darius picked up his bag. I don't do things I can't finish. He walked back out into the corridor. Above him, 12 floors up in a conference room, with a slightly open door and a table full of silent, expensive people, a piece of paper was being drafted. And in his pocket, another piece of paper worn along the crease, 4 paragraphs. The word elective used twice, sat against his chest, right next to his heartbeat. His daughter was waiting for him to come home. The machine was waiting for him to fix it. And for the first time in 2 years, 3 months, and an uncounted number of cold mornings and 4:47 a.m., alarms and lunch notes folded into triangles, and nights spent staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a handprint. Darius Coleman wasn't just surviving. He was calculating. Marcus had the agreement ready in 90 minutes. 4 pages. Clean language. No loopholes. Vanessa had made sure of that. She'd called Marcus twice while he was drafting it, each time adding specificity, each time closing a gap that might allow someone later to argue about what had been promised. She didn't know why she was being so careful about protecting the terms of an agreement she wasn't even certain she believed in yet. She did it anyway. Careful was how she did everything. When Darius came back to the 14th floor at 2:15 in the afternoon, Marcus was waiting for him in the corridor outside the executive suite with a manila folder and a pen. Ms. Whitmore wanted me to walk you through the terms before you sign. I can read. Marcus blinked. Of course, I appreciate it. I can read. He took the folder. He stood in the corridor and read all 4 pages slowly, without rushing the way someone reads a document when they actually intend to understand it, rather than just sign it. Marcus stood beside him, hands folded, watching. When Darius reached the 3rd page, he stopped, read a section again, looked up. This says demonstrated operational capacity as verified by the company's engineering department. That's Harrington's team. That's standard verification language, yes. Change it. Verified by an independent third-party technical review, not internal. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'd need to clear that with Ms. Whitmore. Then clear it. Marcus stepped away and made a phone call. 30 seconds. He came back. She agreed. Darius looked at him for a moment. Then he went back to reading. He signed on the last page. He handed the folder back. He kept 1 copy, folded it carefully, and put it in the same pocket where he kept the insurance letter. The 2 pieces of paper sitting against each other. One representing what he stood to lose, one representing what he was fighting to gain. Lab access. This way. The Vortex 7 lab occupied a sealed room on the 9th floor. Climate-controlled, access restricted, the kind of room that had its own air supply and its own electrical feed, because the equipment inside was sensitive enough that standard building systems introduced too many variables. Darius had never been inside it. Maintenance didn't have clearance for the prototype labs. There was a card reader on the door that logged every entry. When Marcus badged him in and the door clicked open, Darius stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the machine. It was larger than he'd expected. Most machines were when you saw them in person after only imagining them from a description. But the Vortex 7 was genuinely impressive in its scale. A complex assembly of compression chambers, mounting frameworks, pressure vessels, and interconnecting conduit that filled most of the room. It was also clearly not running. The status panel on the primary control interface showed a red fault code that had been sitting there long enough that the indicator light had settled into a steady glow rather than a flash. He walked in. I didn't touch anything yet. He walked the perimeter of the machine first, slowly, the way he always approached a system he didn't know, looking before touching, observing before diagnosing. He'd learned that from a machinist named Roy Engel in Baltimore when he was 19 years old, working his first real engineering job after 2 years of community college and a scholarship application that had taken him 4 attempts to get right. Roy was 60 years old and had been building industrial machinery since before Darius was born, and the first thing Roy had ever said to him was, "The machine will tell you what's wrong if you stop trying to tell it." He'd never forgotten that. He walked the perimeter. He looked at the mounting framework. He crouched down and looked at the connection points between the frame and the floor anchors. He stood up and looked at the stage 4 compression chamber housing, and he saw it immediately. The thing he'd known he would find: the physical evidence of the resonance problem made visible in metal. Microfracturing. Hairline cracks barely visible to the naked eye, radiating from the compressor housing mount in a pattern that was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. Not random stress fractures. A pattern. Radial, consistent, originating from a single stress concentration point. He straightened up. He took out his phone and photographed the fracture pattern from 3 angles. Behind him, the door opened. He didn't turn around. "You found something." Vanessa Whitmore's voice. She was alone. No Marcus, no assistant, no Harrington. "The fracture pattern on the housing mount. You can see the resonance stress distribution in the cracking. It's radial, originating here." He pointed without looking back at her, his finger tracing the air above the fracture pattern. "Which means the resonance is transmitting through the mount itself, not through the chamber wall. The damping solution has to address the mount interface, not the chamber." She came up beside him and looked at where he was pointing. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "How did you know in the hallway? You heard 30 seconds of conversation through a door. How did you know it was resonance?" He was quiet for the moment. He crouched back down and looked at the fracture pattern again. "Because I've seen it before. Not this machine. A different system, different application. But the failure signature is the same: consistent failure at a single stage component. Replacement doesn't fix it. The problem gets worse over time rather than better. That's a system fighting itself. That's what resonance does. It turns a machine's own operation into the thing that's destroying it." "You designed pressurized systems." It wasn't a question. He stood up again. "For 7 years, before I didn't anymore." She waited. He didn't elaborate. "I looked you up," she said. "After you left this afternoon, I had HR pull your application file." He turned and looked at her for the first time since she'd walked in. His expression was steady. "And your application listed previous experience as general mechanical work. It listed your education as some college. It listed references who were a hardware store owner and a pastor. That's accurate. It's not complete. No. You have a degree in mechanical engineering, University of Maryland, graduated in the top 8% of your class. You worked for a company called Meridian Dynamics for 7 years as a senior systems designer. You filed 3 patents during that time, 2 of which are still generating licensing revenue." She paused. "And then 7 years ago, you disappeared from the industry entirely and turned up here 2 years ago, applying for a maintenance position." The lab hummed quietly around them. The red fault light on the control panel glowed steady. "What happened at Meridian Dynamics?" He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a longer conversation." "I have time." "I don't. I have 5 days." He looked back at the machine. "What I need right now is the original design files, not the modified versions, the original CAD models from initial design. And I need the vibration data from the last 3 test runs. All of it, not the summary. The raw data." She held his gaze for another beat. Then she took her phone out and typed something. "You'll have it within the hour. And I need to work alone. I don't want Harrington's team in this room. That's going to be a difficult conversation." "I imagine most of the conversations you have are difficult." Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "Fair enough. I'll handle Harrington. One more thing." "Yes." "I need to leave by 4:30 every day. Non-negotiable." She looked at him. He looked back. "My daughter gets picked up from after school at 5. The bus takes 26 minutes. I need to be on that bus by 4:40. A beat. "I'll have a car arranged." "I don't need a car. I need to leave at 4:30. "Darius?" She said his name the way people say a name when they want to make sure the other person knows they're being heard. "I'll have a car arranged. It'll get you there in 12 minutes. That gives you until 4:50. He looked at her. "Okay." Harrington found out about the solo lab access at 4 o'clock, and he came to Vanessa's office in the specific way that angry, proud men come to offices when they want to express anger without appearing to be angry. Controlled, deliberate the fury, visible only in the particular stiffness of his jaw, and the way he closed the door behind him with a care that was itself a form of aggression. You gave him unsupervised access to the prototype lab. I did. Vanessa, he's a maintenance worker. He's a mechanical engineer with a Maryland degree and 7 years of systems design experience. And he identified a failure mode in 30 seconds that your team hasn't identified in 3 weeks. So I gave him access to the lab. She didn't look up from her computer. What would you like me to say about that? I'd like you to explain how you intend to manage the liability exposure of having an unauthorized. He signed a comprehensive NDA and a project agreement. Marcus drafted it. It's cleaner than most of the contracts we give our senior staff. Now she looked up. Elliot, I need this machine working in 5 days. You have not given me a path to that outcome. He has. That is the entire conversation. Harrington stood very still. And if he fails, then we're exactly where we are right now, and I find another path. She held his gaze. But if he succeeds, I need you to be prepared for what that means. For the department, and for how we got here. He didn't answer. He left. She watched the door close behind him carefully again, the controlled fury in the mechanism of it, and then turned back to her computer and sat for a moment with her hands still on the keyboard, not typing. She was thinking about a mechanical engineer who had spent 2 years replacing light bulbs. She was thinking about a 6-year-old girl named Maya. She was thinking about a company called Meridian Dynamics, and a man who had listed some college on an application for a maintenance job, and the specific deliberate erasure that implied. She picked up her phone and called her head of legal. Not Marcus, her senior counsel, a woman named Diane Park, who had been with the company since the beginning and whom Vanessa trusted more than almost anyone. Diane, I need you to pull everything publicly available on a company called Meridian Dynamics. Focus on anything from 5 to 8 years ago. Patents, personnel disputes, litigation. She paused. Specifically, anything involving an employee named Darius Coleman. Darius worked until 4:28 the first night. He had the original design files on a laptop that IT had set up for him on a workbench in the corner of the lab, the same workbench where Harrington's team had left coffee cups and printed diagnostic reports that were now stacked in a pile Darius had moved to the side without reading. He didn't need their diagnostic reports. He'd already diagnosed it. What he needed now was the architectural solution, the exact damping specification that would interrupt the resonance transmission without compromising the system's performance characteristics. This was the engineering. This was the he hadn't done in years, the part that lived in a different part of his mind from the maintenance work, a deeper part that required a different kind of attention. He had spent 2 years keeping that part of his mind quiet. Not dormant quiet. There was a difference. Dormant implied it had stopped. It had never stopped. It had just been running without output processing, without producing the way an engine idles. Now he let it run. He worked through the original CAD models with the focus of someone picking up a skill they'd never actually lost, only set down. The mathematics came back without effort. The spatial reasoning. The ability to see a 3-dimensional system in his mind, to rotate it, to isolate variables, to trace force distributions through a structure had never left. It was the thing about genuine ability that nobody who hadn't experienced it could fully understand it, didn't atrophy the way muscle did. It waited. At 4:28, he closed the laptop, straightened up, and rolled his shoulders back. He looked at the machine. Tomorrow, he said to it quietly to no one. He picked up his bag. He walked to the door. The company car was waiting in the loading dock. Not a flashy car, just a clean black sedan with a driver who handed him a coffee without being asked and didn't try to make conversation. Darius was grateful for both things. He was at the school by 4:51. Maya came out of the after-school room with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and Gerald the rabbit tucked under her arm. She saw him, and her face did the thing it always did, a specific total brightening the expression of a child for whom the sight of their parent is still purely and completely the best thing that could happen. She ran the last 10 feet. He caught her, lifted her, held her small body against his chest, and felt the particular quality of her weight, familiar and irreplaceable and terrifying to love as much as he loved it. "Daddy, why is there a fancy car?" "Because someone thought we needed a fancy car today." "Did you get a promotion?" He set her down and looked at her face. "Something like that. You want the flat noodles?" Her eyes went wide. "You remembered." "I always remember." He took her hand. They walked to the car together. That night, after the pappardelle and the bath and the story and the careful tucking in of Gerald, the one-eyed rabbit, Darius sat at the kitchen table with the original design files open on his personal laptop. The old one. The one with the cracked corner on the case, and worked until 1 in the morning. He was not tired. Was for the first time in 2 years, 3 months, and an indeterminate number of cold mornings exactly where he was supposed to be. The second day, Patrick Sears was waiting outside the lab when Darius arrived. Not Harrington. Sears. The younger one. The one who had started to say something in the conference room before Vanessa shut him down. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and the studied casualness of someone who has rehearsed a stance. Darius swiped his card. The door clicked. "I've been thinking about your resonance theory." Darius pushed the door open. "Good for you. I ran a secondary simulation last night. Adjusted the frequency range parameters the way you described." A pause. The resonance signature showed up. Darius stopped. He turned around slowly and looked at Sears. Sears uncrossed his arms. The studied casualness was gone. What was underneath it was something Darius recognized: a young engineer who had found something real and didn't know what to do with the fact that he hadn't found it first. "I wanted you to know I ran it, and it showed up exactly where you said it would." Another pause. "I didn't tell Harrington." "Why not?" Sears looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. "Because I think he would have found a way to explain it away, and I didn't want it explained away." He met Darius's eyes. "You were right. I wanted you to know someone in there knows you were right." Darius looked at him for a long moment. "What's your specialty?" "Structural dynamics. My thesis was on vibration damping and high-load mechanical systems." A beat. "Come in." Sears blinked. "What?" "Come in. Close the door. If you understand structural damping and you're not going to waste my time defending Harrington's methods, then you might be useful. But the moment you become a problem, you leave. No argument, no discussion. You leave." Sears straightened up. "Understood." They worked side by side for 6 hours without stopping. Sears was good, genuinely good, with the kind of technical intuition that couldn't be taught, only developed, and Darius found himself recalibrating his judgment of the younger man with each passing hour. He had made a mistake in the conference room. He had let the group's laughter pull him in. But here, alone with the problem, with the data in front of him and nobody watching, he was someone completely different. He was a real engineer. By midday, they had the damping specification roughed out. Not finalized, there were still variables to account for, materials, tolerances to verify. But the core solution was there, mapped out on a shared document that Darius had opened on the lab laptop, and that Sears was annotating with the precise, efficient notation of someone who thought in systems. "This mount interface modification." Sears pointed at the screen. "The angular bracket at the secondary connection point, you want to replace it entirely, or add a damping layer to the existing bracket." "Replace it." A damping layer on the existing bracket would reduce the resonance transmission, but it wouldn't eliminate it. The bracket geometry itself is part of the problem. It's transmitting the frequency in the direction of the compressor housing because of the angle. We change the geometry, we change the transmission path. New bracket means fabrication time. How long? Sears pulled up something on his phone, made a calculation. If I call the machine shop now, and if they bump it, 48 hours. Maybe 36 if we explain the situation. Call them now. Sears called them. He explained the situation. He used Vanessa Whitmore's name, which he clearly understood to be a resource available to him in exactly these circumstances. He was right. The shop foreman said 30 hours. 30 hours, Sears reported. Good. That gives us time to finalize the installation spec and prep the mounting surface. They kept working. Harrington came to the lab at 3 o'clock. He didn't knock, his access card still worked, and he pushed the door open with the momentum of someone who has made a decision and is executing it before the decision can be reconsidered. He stopped when he saw Sears. "Patrick, what are you doing in here?" Sears straightened, but didn't move away from the workbench. "Working. I didn't assign you to this. Ms. Whitmore's project agreement gives Mr. Coleman authority to bring in additional technical support at his discretion. He asked me to help." Sears held his gaze steadily. "So I'm helping." Something moved through Harrington's expression. Something complicated. The cocktail of betrayal and pride that a mentor experiences when a protege makes an independent choice that the mentor wouldn't have sanctioned. He looked at Darius. Darius was looking back at him with the same calm, diagnostic attention he gave everything. He didn't speak. "I'd like to review what you have," Harrington said. His voice was different, not the controlled contempt from the conference room. Something flatter, something that required more effort. Darius looked at the screen, then back at Harrington. "Why?" "Because it's my department's machine, and I have an obligation to understand what's being done to it. You had 3 weeks and $43 million in resources. What's being done to it now is what should have been done 3 weeks ago." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "You want to review it? Review it. I'm not going to explain it to you or defend it. It either makes sense to you or it doesn't." Harrington walked to the workbench. He looked at the screen. He read in silence for 2 minutes. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, the angular bracket modification. Yes. That's not a small change. That's a fundamental structural alteration to the Stage 4 mounting assembly. Yes. If it's wrong, then the machine fails again and you still have your job. Darius looked at him directly. If it's right, the machine works, and you have to figure out how to explain to your department why none of you found it. Harrington's jaw tightened. "I'm going to be honest with you. Please. I don't like this. I don't like how this happened. I don't like that we missed it. And I don't like—" He stopped, seemed to choose the next words carefully. "I don't like what it says about the assumptions we were making. About the maintenance worker." A long pause. "Yes." Darius held his gaze. "I know." He said it without heat, without accusation, with a flatness that was somehow more cutting than anger would have been. "I've known that my whole career. You're not the first Harrington. You're just the one who happened to be standing here when it mattered." Harrington looked at the screen again. He looked at the fracture pattern photographs that Darius had printed and pinned to the board above the workbench. "The radial pattern. You saw it immediately." "Yes. I walked past this machine every day for 3 weeks. I know. I didn't—" He stopped again. "See it. No." Darius turned back to the screen. "You weren't looking for it. You were looking for what you expected to find. That's not stupidity. That's a very human problem. It happens to engineers all the time." He paused. "But it happened to cost you 3 weeks." Harrington stood at the workbench for another minute. Then he straightened. "If there's anything the department can support, materials testing, secondary fabrication, anything, I'll make it available." He walked to the door. He paused without turning around. "For what it's worth, the resonance diagnosis. It's correct. I can see it now that I know what to look for." He pushed the door open. "I should have seen it 3 weeks ago." He left. Sears let out a slow breath. "I have never in 6 years heard that man admit he was wrong about anything." Darius didn't look up from the screen. "Most men who've never had to admit they were wrong just haven't been in the right room yet." He pulled up the next section of the design file. "Keep working." That night, Darius called his neighbor, Mrs. Paulette Archer, a 71-year-old woman who had lived in the apartment next door since before Darius and Maya had moved in, who had made it her quiet personal mission to ensure that Maya Coleman was never without a responsible adult for more than 15 consecutive minutes. Mrs. Archer watched Maya on the nights when Darius worked late and never once asked for more than the occasional plate of whatever he'd cooked. "She's fine," Mrs. Archer said before he could ask. "We made cornbread. She told me a very long story about a rabbit named Gerald, who is apparently having some kind of personal crisis. He lost his eye. She's aware. She seems to feel he needs emotional support. She's probably right. She asked me if you were going to be famous. He stopped. What did you tell her? I told her her daddy was already the most important person I knew, and famous was just what happened when other people figured out what we already knew. A pause. She seems satisfied with that. She's asleep. Don't rush home. I've got her. He sat with the phone in his hand after she hung up in the quiet of the lab, the machine dormant in front of him, the red fault light still glowing steady. He thought about Maya asking if he was going to be famous. I thought about what famous meant to a 6-year-old, which was probably something like important and visible and known by people who didn't know you before. He had been all three of those things once. And then someone had decided he should stop being them. And he had let it happen because he was exhausted and grieving and alone, and the fight had cost him more than he had left at the time. He opened the laptop. He went back to work. On the 4th day, the new bracket arrived from the machine shop. Darius held it in his hands and examined it for 3 full minutes before he said anything. He turned it, ran his thumb along the modified angle, checked the tolerance marks. Sears was watching him. It's right. Darius set it down on the workbench carefully. It's right. They installed it that afternoon, a 4-hour process that required them to partially disassemble the stage 4. Mounting assembly, remove the existing bracket prep, the mounting surface, and fit the new component with the precision that high-tolerance mechanical work demanded. Darius worked with his hands in a way he hadn't in years. Not the maintenance worker hands of tightening fixtures and replacing drivers, but the engineer's hands. The hands that understood what they were touching, at a level that bypassed language that felt the fit of a component, the way a musician feels a chord. When the last fastener was torqued to spec, Darius straightened up and looked at what they'd done. Sears looked at him. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Full load test. Everything or nothing. He picked up his bag. He looked at the machine one more time. 4 days of work. 7 years of knowledge. A daughter's heartbeat. A company's future. All of it converging on a single test that would happen tomorrow morning in a room full of people who had already decided what he was. He turned off the bench light. He walked out. And he went home to fold a lunch note into a triangle to tuck in a one-eyed rabbit and to sit at a kitchen table until 1 in the morning. Not because there was more work to do, but because sometimes the only way to be ready for what's coming is to sit very still with everything you know and let it settle. The 5th morning arrived, the way important mornings always do, without ceremony, without warning, exactly like every other morning that came before, it indifferent to what it was carrying. Darius was awake at 4:47. He lay in the dark and listened to Maya breathing through the monitor. The sound was the same as it always was. Steady, slightly labored, the particular rhythm that had become the metronome of his life over the past 14 months. He had learned to read that sound the way sailors read weather. Any change in it woke him instantly, completely, the way nothing else could. Tonight it was steady. Tonight it was fine. He got up. He made coffee. He packed her lunch. He wrote the note and folded it into a triangle and tucked it under the sandwich. He stood in her doorway for 90 seconds. Then he got dressed. The gray work shirt was still on the back of the bathroom door. He put it on the same way he always did, left arm first, then right, then 2 buttons from the bottom up. He looked at himself in the mirror above the sink for a moment longer than usual. Not vanity. Something else. The specific act of a man confirming that he is still himself before walking into something that might change what that means. He was still himself. He went to wake Maya. She came awake the way she always did, instantly fully blinking up at him with those dark eyes that had been her mother's eyes. The eyes he could never look at directly for too long without feeling the particular weight of everything they contained. Is today the day? He hadn't told her the details. He'd told her he was working on something important at work. She was 6, but she was not an unobservant 6. She had registered the company car, the later dinners, the way he sat at the kitchen table after she was asleep. She had assembled the information with the quiet, systematic attention of a child who has learned that paying attention to her father is how she knows if things are okay. Today is the day. She sat up. She looked at him very seriously. "Are you scared?" He looked back at her. "A little." "Mrs. Archer says scared means you care about something." "Mrs. Archer is a smart woman." Maya considered this. Then she nodded the executive nod, the small person approving a proposal nod that always made something catch in his chest. "You're going to do it, Daddy?" "Yeah. Yeah. Because you always fix things." He looked at her for a moment. This small, certain person. This person who breathed too loud and loved a one-eyed rabbit and had a heart that was working harder than it should have to, and who believed in him with a totality that he had not yet figured out how to deserve. "Go get dressed," he said. "The flat noodles are for tonight, if it's a good day." "It's going to be a good day." She said it the way children say things they've decided are true, not as hope, but as fact established and settled, and not open for revision. He drove her to school. She went in without looking back. She paused at the door and turned around once. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." She didn't say anything for a second, just looked at him with those eyes. "Come home tonight." "Always do." She pushed through the door and was gone. He sat in the car for a moment after she disappeared. The engine was running. The heat was on. He reached into his pocket and touched the edge of the folded insurance letter without taking it out. Just touched it. Then he put the car in drive. The building was already charged when he arrived. He felt it in the lobby, that specific atmospheric quality that exists in places where something is about to be decided. A tension that lives in the way people move and hold themselves and avoid eye contact with anyone they might have to account for later. The receptionist at the main desk was on the phone and didn't look up. Two men in suits he didn't recognize were talking quietly near the elevator bank, the kind of quiet that means the conversation is important. One of them glanced at Darius and looked away. High took the service elevator to 9. Sears was already in the lab. He was standing at the control interface with a tablet in his hand, running through the pre-test checklist with the focused, slightly feverish energy of someone who had not slept particularly well. He looked up when Darius came in. "Fabrication verified to spec. I went over the bracket installation twice last night after you left. Torque values are correct. The mounting surface prep is good." He lowered the tablet. "I ran the vibration model again with the new bracket geometry. The resonance transmission drops to less than 3% of previous levels." "Good." "The test is scheduled for 10 o'clock. Ms. Whitmore wants a full load run, not a staged test." "That's the right call. A staged test won't tell us anything we don't already know. Full load or nothing." Sears nodded. Then he said something that was slightly outside his usual register. "I want you to know whatever happens today, what you did in here this week was real engineering. The best I've seen." He paused. "I should have listened in the conference room. Instead You stopped." "I almost didn't. But you did." Darius looked at him steadily. "And then you ran the simulation. And then you came to the lab. That's what matters. Not the almost." Sears was quiet for a moment. "Harrington wants to be in the room for the test." "Fine." "Are you sure? Because I can..." "It's his department's machine. He should be here." Darius set his bag down and pulled up the design files on the lab laptop. "Anybody who was in that conference room 5 days ago should be here. They were here for the problem. They should be here for the solution." He said it without drama. It was not a statement of pride or revenge. It was the same flat factual logic he applied to everything. The same engineering mind that saw the world as a system of inputs and outputs, causes and effects, problems and their correct resolutions. Sears looked at him for a moment. "You're not nervous at all, are you?" Darius looked at the screen. "I didn't say that." By 9:30, the 9th floor corridor outside the lab had developed the quiet, purposeful congestion of people who all need to be somewhere and are not entirely sure they want to be there. Harrington arrived first at 9:15 and stood against the wall near the door with his arms crossed and his expression carefully arranged into something that was trying to be neutral. Two of his senior engineers arrived behind him, a woman named Dr. Chen, who ran materials analysis, and a man named Torres, who headed the simulation division, the same Torres who had run the original frequency analysis that had missed the resonance signature. Torres didn't look at Darius when he came in. Darius noticed this and filed it away and moved on. At 9:40, Vanessa came in with Marcus and two people Darius hadn't seen before, a man and a woman, both in expensive suits, both with the specific bearing of people who represent money and expect to be treated accordingly. One of them was carrying a leather portfolio. Darius recognized the category immediately. Investors. She had brought investors to the test. He looked at her across the lab. She met his gaze for a moment. There was something in her expression, a directness, a slight tightening around the eyes that was not quite apology and not quite challenge, but contained elements of both. She had brought investors because if this worked, she needed them to see it happen in real time. And if it failed, she would deal with the consequences of that in real time too. He respected that. He didn't love it, but he respected it. The lab filled up. 12 people in a room built for 6 arranged in a rough semicircle around the Vortex 7, the way people arrange themselves around something that might explode, or might be magnificent, and they're not entirely sure which. At 9:58, Darius walked to the control interface. The room went quiet, not the polite conversational quiet of people pausing their discussions. The complete held breath quiet of people who have simultaneously understood that something real is about to happen and have stopped pretending they aren't waiting for it. He ran through the pre-start checklist. Not from the tablet, from memory. Every parameter, every safety interlock, every system status indicator. He checked each one with the unhurried focus of a man who has run checklists his entire adult life and understands that the purpose of a checklist is not efficiency, but exactitude. The room watched him. He was aware of being watched and set the awareness aside. He had been watched his whole career, watched with skepticism, watched with condescension, watched with the particular attention that people give to someone they've already decided doesn't belong. He had learned to move through being watched the way you move through weather, acknowledge it, adapt to it, keep going. He reached the last item on the checklist. He looked at the machine. I thought for just a fraction of a second about Maya saying, "You always fix things," in the specific settled voice of a child who has decided something is true. He engaged the startup sequence. The Vortex 7 came alive. The sound it made was the sound of controlled power, a deep building hum that rose through the frequency range as the system pressurized, the kind of sound that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. The pressure gauges climbed. The temperature monitors held steady. The flow indicators moved into the green. Stage 1. Clean. Stage 2. Clean. Darius watched the control panel with the complete attention of someone who is reading a language in real time, not just monitoring numbers, but interpreting them. Feeling the system's behavior through the data. The way a doctor reads a patient's vital signs, not as isolated metrics, but as a living pattern. Stage 3. This was where the tension in the room became physical. Darius could feel it without looking, the collective held breath, the unconscious forward lean of 12 people who had all in one way or another been living inside this machine's failure for weeks. Stage 3. Clean. The pressure continued to climb. The system moved towards Stage 4 with the steady inevitability of a process doing exactly what it was designed to do. Harrington against the far wall had uncrossed his arms at some point in the last 2 minutes. Darius didn't see this. He was looking at the panel, but Sears did, and Sears would tell him about it later. Stage 4 engaged. The compressor hit full load. The room seemed to stop. The frequency. Darius had been tracking on the vibration monitor. The resonance signature that had been the machine's recurring death note. The frequency that appeared at this exact moment in every previous test run appeared. Briefly. A small spike visible on the display there for less than 2 seconds. And then the new bracket did what it was designed to do. The resonance transmission dropped. The vibration dampened. The frequency dissipated into the modified mounting geometry, the way energy dissipates when it no longer has a path to concentrate. The compressor ran clean. Full load. Stage 4. The exact point where the machine had died every single time for 3 weeks. Running clean. The pressure gauges held. The temperature monitors held. The flow indicators stayed green. The vibration monitor settled into the normal operating range and stayed there with the steady, unspectacular reliability of a system doing exactly what it was built to do. The room didn't react immediately. It took 3 or 4 seconds, the lag of people whose nervous systems are still braced for failure and need a moment to register that failure has not arrived. That the thing they were waiting for is not coming. That the machine is simply and completely and without drama working. Then someone exhaled. It was Torres. A long, slow exhale through his nose, the sound of 3 weeks of pressure leaving a body all at once. Then Dr. Chen said something in Mandarin under her breath that nobody translated, but everyone understood from her tone. Then, one of the investors, the man with the leather portfolio, said very quietly, "My God, the machine ran. It ran through stage 4 and into stage 5, and through the full operational cycle that it had never once completed before. Not in any test, not in any iteration, and it completed it the way it was supposed to complete it, steadily, cleanly, with the unremarkable reliability that is the highest aspiration of any engineered system. When the cycle completed and the machine powered down into its cool-down sequence, the control panel showed a single status indicator. Green, no fault code. For the first time since the prototype had been built, no fault code. Darius stood at the control interface with his hands resting lightly on the edge of the panel, looking at the green indicator. He didn't pump his fist. He didn't turn around. He didn't perform anything. He stood there for a moment and let the green light be real. Then he straightened up and turned around. The room was looking at him, all 12 people. Looking at him with the particular attention that people give to something they have been forced to revise their understanding of, the focused, slightly uncomfortable gaze of people who have just been shown definitively and without possibility of reinterpretation that they were wrong about something they were very certain about. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Vanessa Whitmore stepped forward. She walked through the cluster of people between her and the control interface with the directness of someone who has decided exactly what she is going to do and is doing it. She stopped in front of Darius. She looked at him. She extended her hand. "You fixed it." He took her hand, shook it once. The machine fixed itself. Once it wasn't fighting its own architecture. She held his gaze. "We need to talk about what comes next." "I know. Not here." She glanced at the room full of people. "My office, an hour." He nodded. She turned back to the room. To the investors who were both now standing with the slightly dazed expression of people whose morning has gone substantially better than they'd prepared for. "Gentlemen, I believe we have a demonstration to discuss." She walked them out. The room began to decompress people, exhaling, moving the collective held tension, releasing itself in small individual ways. Torres was looking at the vibration monitor with an expression that was complex and private. Dr. Chen was making notes on her tablet with focused, rapid attention. Harrington walked across the room to where Darius was still standing at the control interface. He stopped in front of him. I didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at the control panel, at the green status indicator, at the absence of a fault code. 7 years, Darius said quietly. Not to explain, just to fill the space. 7 years of what? That's how long I designed systems, before I stopped. Harrington looked at him. Why did you stop? Darius met his eyes. Someone decided I should. A beat. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. He looked at the green light. A company called Meridian Dynamics. I designed a compression system for them, similar class to this one different application. It worked. It worked very well. And then the project lead filed a revised patent application with his name on it, and mine removed. And when I contested it, I found out very quickly what it costs to contest something like that, when you don't have money, and the person you're contesting has both money and the kind of relationships that make problems disappear. He was quiet for a moment. By the time the dispute was over, I had legal bills, I couldn't pay a professional reputation that had been systematically dismantled, a wife who was sick, and a daughter who needed health insurance. I took the first job that offered it. He looked at Harrington. A maintenance job. Harrington stood very still. That's... He stopped. Started again. That's a crime. What they did. Patent theft. Yes, it is. Did you pursue it? I told you. I had legal bills and a sick wife and a daughter who needed insurance. He said it without self-pity, without anger, duality of someone who has explained this to themselves enough times that it has become simply a thing that happened. You make choices based on what you have. I had a daughter. I chose her. Harrington was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the green status light. Darius. He said the name the way Vanessa had said it carefully, with the intention of being heard. What happened to you at Meridian? That is not something that should have happened. And what we did in that conference room 5 days ago. He stopped again. His jaw worked slightly. I mocked you. In front of my team. In front of people who follow my lead. I told them without saying it in so many words that you were not worth listening to. And I was wrong. I was wrong in a way that I am going to be thinking about for a long time. Darius looked at him. I don't need the apology to be complicated. Simple is fine. Harrington nodded once. I'm sorry. Darius held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't absolution. It was something more practical, an acknowledgement that the words had been said, that they were true, that both men could move forward carrying them. The specific resolution available to adults who don't have the luxury of clean endings. Sears appeared beside them. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee, and he handed one to Darius with the slightly awkward gesture of someone who wants to do something and has settled on the most practical available option. Darius took it. Thank you for the work. Sears looked at the green light. Thank you for letting me be in the room. He paused. I'm going to be honest with you. I came to engineering school because I wanted to build things that mattered. The last 2 years I've been running simulations and writing reports and going to meetings. Today was the first time in 2 years that I remembered why I came. Darius drank the coffee. It was too hot and not great, the standard institutional coffee of corporate break rooms everywhere, and it was exactly what he wanted. That's what the work does, he said. When you let it, it reminds you. He called Mrs. Archer from the hallway outside the lab. She picked up on the second ring. Well, it worked. A pause. Then a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, but contained the best elements of both. Oh, baby. Don't tell Maya yet. I want to tell her tonight. My lips are sealed. Are you okay? He thought about the question. He was standing in a corridor on the 9th floor of a building where 4 days ago he had been a maintenance worker replacing light fixtures. He was holding a paper cup of bad coffee. The green status light was glowing on the other side of a closed door. He had $94,000 coming, and a daughter who needed a surgery, and a company that was about to offer him something he hadn't expected to be offered again in this lifetime. I'm okay, he said. I think I'm actually okay. Good. Now go do whatever comes next. I've got Gerald. She hung up. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he went to find out what came next. Vanessa's office was on the 14th floor. The executive floor, which Darius had visited many times with a tool bag and a work order, and never once with an appointment. The difference was surprisingly physical. Something in the way he moved through the space. Something in the way the space received him. The receptionist outside Vanessa's office looked up when he approached and said, Mr. Coleman, with a familiarity that meant she'd been told to expect him, and something about hearing his name said that way in that space by someone who worked on the 14th floor. Something about it registered in his chest as a small, complicated thing. She let him in. Vanessa was at her desk, but she stood when he came in and came around to the sitting area, 2 low chairs and a coffee table near the window, rather than staying behind the desk. He noticed this. The desk was authority and distance. The sitting area was conversation. He sat. She sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the window, Atlanta glittered and moved indifferent to what was happening in this room. The investors are staying, she said. Both of them. When the machine completed the full cycle, the man with the portfolio called his managing partner while he was still standing in the lab. The other funding round is going forward. Good. The company is not going to fail, which it might have if you hadn't been in that hallway. Someone else would have found it eventually. Maybe. But eventually wasn't going to save us. We had 11 days. She looked at him directly. You had 5. He said nothing. I owe you something beyond what's in the contract. I want you to know that I understand that. The contract covers what we agreed. The contract covers Maya's surgery. It doesn't cover 7 years. She held his gaze. Diane, my senior counsel, found the meridian dynamics matter. The patent dispute. A pause. Darius. What they did to you is documented. The original filing timestamps, the revision history, the personnel records from that period. The evidence of what happened is sitting in public records and Meridian's own documentation. It was never pursued because you didn't have the resources to pursue it. I was very still. I have a legal team, Vanessa continued. A good one, with resources. If you want to pursue the Meridian matter formally legally with full institutional support behind you, I want to offer that. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through him. Not the controlled diagnostic calm that he wore like armor in professional spaces. Something older and less managed, the specific physical sensation of being handed back something you had stopped believing you would ever see again. Not just the legal case. The acknowledgement. The confirmation that it had happened, that it was real, that he had not been wrong to feel what he'd felt about it. He had spent 7 years carrying the weight of a story that nobody had believed, and now someone with the power to do something about it was sitting across from him saying she believed it. He looked out the window. My wife was sick when all of that happened, he said. Her name was Angela. She died 2 years after we lost the case. She never saw me get back to doing the work I was trained to do. He paused. That's the part I can't fix. That's the part that's already done. I know. The Meridian matter. Yes, I want to pursue it. Not for the money, though I won't pretend the money wouldn't matter. For the record. He looked back at her. I want it on the record that it happened. What they did. I want my name back on the work I did. Then that's what we'll do. She said it the way she said most things, with the direct, certain commitment of someone who understands that words mean what they say and intends for hers to. There's something else I want to offer you, she said. And I want you to hear it as an offer, not as a transaction. You can say no. Okay. I want to offer you a position. Engineering Division Lead New Systems Development. You'd be building a team and running a research program focused on next-generation compression technology, which as of this morning is something we have a very compelling proof of concept for. She paused. The salary is a number that would let you move out of the apartment on Clement Street and into a place with a yard. Maya could have a yard. He looked at her. You know what apartment I live in. I know a fair amount about your situation. I want to be honest about that. I had people look into your background after you walked into my conference room. I was trying to understand who you were. She held his gaze without flinching. Some of what I found made me feel things that were not comfortable. The Meridian matter. Your wife. The insurance denial. The maintenance job. She paused. You should know that I looked. And you should know what I did with what I found. You drafted a legal strategy and offered me a job. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. The job, he said. I want to think about it. Not because I don't want it. Because I've learned that the decision you make in the moment when something good happens is not always the same decision you'd make after you've slept on it. That's one of the most rational things anyone has ever said to me in this office. I'll give you an answer by Monday. Monday is fine. She stood. He stood. They were the same height, which he hadn't noticed until now. The payment for Maya's surgery will be transferred today, before you leave the building. That is not contingent on anything else. That's what was promised. He looked at her. Thank you. 2 words. He said them simply, without elaboration, the way he said everything that mattered, without ornamentation, without performance, with the direct weight of someone who means exactly what they say. She nodded once. Go home, Darius. Tell your daughter the good news. He walked to the door. He paused in the doorway, the same doorway where 4 days ago he had told her he still had 2 more light fixtures to replace. He looked back at her. The lights on 14, the 4th fixture in the corridor. The driver I installed might need to be checked in 60 days. The unit I had in stock was from an older batch. It should hold, but keep an eye on it." She looked at him. Something happened in her face. Not quite a smile, not quite something else, but the specific expression of a person who has just understood something completely and finds it against all expectation wonderful. "I'll make sure someone checks it," she said. He walked out. He took the service elevator down, not because he had to, because it was the elevator he knew, the one he'd ridden every day for 2 years, 3 months, and a number of mornings. He had stopped counting. He rode it down to the basement level and walked back through the maintenance corridor and set his tool bag down on Gerald's desk. Gerald looked up, looked at his face, looked back down at his clipboard. "Side project done. Side project done." Gerald nodded slowly. Didn't ask for details. Didn't need them. He could read Darius's face. He read every work order that came through his department with the practiced eye of someone who knows the difference between a job that went wrong and a job that went right, and doesn't need the paperwork to tell him which is which. "You going to be okay?" Darius looked at the board above Gerald's desk. The work orders. The neat rows of broken things waiting to be fixed. "Yeah," he said. "I think I'm going to be okay." He picked up his bag. He walked out of the maintenance corridor for the last time as a maintenance worker. Though he didn't know that yet, or maybe he did know it in the way you sometimes know things before they become official in the place where the facts live, before the words catch up to them. The car was waiting in the loading dock. He got in. The driver handed him a coffee without being asked. He sat back. He closed his eyes for the length of time it took to pull out of the loading dock and onto the street, the city moving around him, the ordinary afternoon traffic of people going from one place to another, indifferent to the fact that something had just shifted in the life of the man in the back seat, quietly, completely, and without reversing. When he opened his eyes, he took out his phone. He typed a message to Mrs. Archer. "Tell her the flat noodles are definitely happening tonight." The reply came back in 45 seconds. She just jumped off the couch. Gerald lost his other shoe. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked out the window at Atlanta, passing by the city that had never once moved for him, that had made him earn every inch of ground he stood on, and for the first time in longer than he could precisely calculate, he didn't feel like he was fighting it. He felt simply and completely and without drama like he was going home. The pappardelle was perfect. Maya ate 2 full bowls, which was unusual enough that Mrs. Archer, who had stayed for dinner because Darius had asked her to, because some nights needed more people in them than just 2, raised an eyebrow across the table and said nothing, which was its own form of commentary. Gerald the rabbit sat propped against the napkin holder in his customary dinner position. The missing shoe had been located under the couch cushion and restored. Order had been maintained. After the second bowl, Maya looked up at her father with the direct, undeflected gaze she'd inherited from a woman he still missed every single day. "Daddy, tell me what happened." "I told you. The project worked out." "That's not the whole story." Mrs. Archer made a sound into her water glass that was technically a cough. Darius looked at his daughter. 6 years old. Dark eyes that saw everything and filed it and retrieved it at the exact moment it was most relevant. He thought about how much to say. He thought about what it meant to tell a child the truth about the world. Not the sanitized version, not the version designed to protect her from the sharp edges, but the actual truth, the one she was going to have to live in. He thought about what Angela would have said. Angela would have said, "She's tougher than you think. She's your daughter. Tell her." "Okay," he said. "Here's the real version," he told her. Not all of it. Not the Meridian history. Not the legal details. Not the full weight of the insurance denial letter. But the shape of it. A machine that was broken. A room full of people who didn't think he could fix it. Him fixing it anyway. And now because of that, Maya was going to be able to see the doctor. The real doctor. The one who could help her heart. Maya listened without interrupting. This was unusual. She was not under normal circumstances a non-interrupting child. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The people who laughed at you," she said. "Were they sorry?" Some of them. What about the ones who weren't? He looked at her. That's their problem to carry, not mine. She thought about this, nodded slowly with the gravity of someone processing a principle they intend to apply. Okay, she said. Can I have more noodles? Mrs. Archer laughed a real laugh, full and unguarded, and reached for the pot. Later, after Maya was asleep, and Mrs. Archer had gone home with a container of leftovers and a squeeze of Darius's arm that said everything she didn't put into words. Darius sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the apartment and opened his laptop. He didn't open the design files. He opened a different folder, one he hadn't opened in years, buried under layers of subdirectories with neutral names that didn't announce what they contained. Inside it were documents, patent applications, technical drawings, project correspondence, performance reviews, the complete documented record of 7 years at Meridian Dynamics, which he had preserved with the careful, systematic thoroughness of a man who suspected he might need it someday, and had no way of knowing when that day would come. He had kept everything. He scrolled through it slowly. Not reading he knew what was in there, but confirming. Confirming that it was real, that it existed, that the history he carried in his body had a paper counterpart that the world could examine. He closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet for a long time. Then he went to bed, and for the first time in 14 months, he slept without waking up once to listen to the monitor. Monday came the way Darius had wanted it to after a weekend that he'd spent almost entirely with Maya, 2 days of the specific, unhurried time that had been so scarce for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have it. They went to the park. They made pancakes on Sunday morning with blueberries arranged in a face on top because Maya had decided that pancakes needed faces, and he had not argued the point. They watched a movie about a fish which Maya had seen 4 times and narrated along with, under her breath, occasionally correcting the film's pacing. He thought about the job offer the whole time. Not constantly, not obsessively. But it was there the way important decisions are always there during the time you've given yourself to sit with them, present in the background of everything else waiting. I thought about what it would mean to go back. Not to Whitmore specifically, to the work. To engineering. To the version of himself that existed before Meridian Dynamics made a systematic effort to erase him. He thought about whether that version of himself was still accessible, still intact, after everything that had happened between then and now. He thought about the lab, the 5 days in the lab with Sears, the design files, the bracket fabrication, the moment when the stage 4 compression held and the fault code disappeared, and he thought, yes, it's still there. It never left. It was just waiting. He also thought about the gray work shirt on the back of the bathroom door, about Gerald Hodges and his clipboard and the work order board with its neat rows of broken things, about the particular dignity of that work, the realness of it, the way fixing a broken thing. Any broken thing was never nothing, was always something that mattered to someone. He had not been diminished by 2 years of maintenance work. He had been sustained by it. He needed to know that. He needed to carry that knowledge into whatever came next, so that whatever came next didn't make him into someone who forgot where he'd been. Sunday night he called Vanessa. She picked up on the 3rd ring. You said Monday. It is Monday. It's 11:50. A pause. Then something that was almost a laugh. Yes, it is. I'll take the position, but I have conditions. Tell me. Gerald Hodges, my supervisor in maintenance. He's been with this company 17 years. He runs that department with a level of competence and dedication that nobody on the 14th floor has ever noticed. Because nobody on the 14th floor thinks about the 14th floor's light fixtures until they stop working. I want him reclassified. Senior operations management with the pay grade and the benefits that go with it. He's been doing that job for a decade without the title. Silence on the other end. Anything else? Patrick Sears. He's good. Better than good. He's been underused in Harrington's department because Harrington runs a hierarchy and Sears doesn't fit neatly into it. When I build my team, I want him. Full transfer, no pushback from the engineering department. Harrington won't like that. Harrington will adapt. He's already started. Another pause. What else? The Meridian matter. I want Diane Park on it personally, not delegated. and I want to be in every meeting. I'm not a client to be managed, I'm a participant. The story of what happened is mine, and I'm not handing it to a legal team to tell without me in the room. Agreed. And one more thing. Yes, my hours. I leave at 4:30, every day, non-negotiable. My daughter gets picked up from school, we eat dinner together. I put her to bed. Whatever the project is, whatever the deadline is, it works around that, not the other way. The line was quiet for a moment. Darius, you could have asked for a great deal more. I asked for what I need. Most people who come into a position of leverage ask for what they want. I know what I want. I'm asking for what I need. A beat. There's a difference. You understand that. A longer pause. Yes, I do. Her voice had changed slightly, almost imperceptibly, but he caught it. The specific shift that happens when a professional interaction touches something personal. Monday morning, 8 o'clock. HR will have the paperwork. Your office is on 11. I thought you might prefer not to be on 14 immediately. You can move if you want to later, but I thought you might want a transition. I thought about that. The thoughtfulness of it. The recognition that a man who had spent 2 years in the basement might need something between the basement and the executive floor. The understanding that a transition was not weakness, but wisdom. 11 is fine. See you Monday morning then. One more thing. You said one more thing already. Different one more thing. Go ahead. The fourth light fixture in the corridor outside your conference room. The driver I installed. I need someone to check it in 60 days. I don't want it to go out during a meeting. The pause this time was longer than the others. I'll put it on the calendar myself, she said. He hung up. He sat in the quiet kitchen. The monitor on the counter was steady. Maya's breathing, the familiar rhythm of it, the sound that had been both his anchor and his greatest fear for 14 months. I thought about 60 days from now. About Maya's surgical consultation, which Vanessa's office had already helped schedule at St. Marcus Children's Hospital with the pediatric cardiologist who had first used the word intervention in a beige office with motivational posters. He thought about the difference between the man who had sat in that office 14 months ago and the man sitting at this kitchen table tonight. The difference was not in what he knew or what he was capable of. The difference was in what the world was finally willing to let him do with it. He went to bed. The Meridian Dynamics matter moved faster than he expected. Diane Park was, as Vanessa had implied, exceptional. She was a small, precise woman in her early 50s who wore her hair pulled back and spoke in complete, perfectly organized sentences that left no room for ambiguity and very little room for argument. She called Darius the Tuesday after he started his new position and opened the conversation with 4 words, "I've seen the file." And the documentation you preserved is extraordinary. The timestamp discrepancy between your original patent filing and Meridian's revised application is 11 days. 11 days with a clear chain of custody that shows your original filing was accessed by the project lead, a man named Richard Caulfield, 6 days before the revision. She paused. Mr. Coleman, I have handled intellectual property disputes for 22 years. This is not a gray area. This is not a he said she said case. This is documented theft. The only reason it was never successfully prosecuted is that you ran out of resources before Caulfield did. That's accurate. Richard Caulfield is currently a senior vice president at a company called Apex Industrial in Houston. He has filed 4 additional patents in the 7 years since yours. We will need to examine those carefully. You think he did it more than once? I think a person who does something like this successfully once rarely stops. Her voice was measured and entirely without drama, the way the most frightening legal assessments always are. The statute of limitations on the original matter is complicated but not closed, and the reputational and civil remedies available to you are substantial. Another pause. I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. What do you want from this? Not what do you expect to get. What do you want? Because those are different, and I need to know which I'm working toward. He thought about this for a moment. I want my name on my work. The patents I filed. I want the record corrected. Whatever happens to Caulfield after that, Whatever the legal consequences are, I'm not driving this to hurt him. I'm driving it to fix what was broken. You understand that fixing what was broken may in fact hurt him considerably. I understand that, but that's a consequence of what he did, not a goal of what I'm doing. He paused. There's a difference. Yes, there is. He could hear something in her voice, a slight shift, the professional register touching something adjacent to personal. That is for what it's worth exactly the right answer. It won't make the process easier, but it will make it cleaner. When do we start? We started when I read the file. I'm filing the initial documentation by end of week. His first week on the 11th floor was the strangest week of his adult life. Not bad strange, not good strange, just strange. The particular strangeness of re-entering a world that you had been exiled from and finding that it still fit, that the muscle memory was still there, that the part of your mind that had been running on idle for 2 years, 3 months, and an uncountable number of cold mornings would simply pick up where it had left off, as if no time had passed. As if the gray work shirt and the tool bag and the HVAC inspections and the generator checks had been something that happened to someone else, except he knew they hadn't. He knew they had happened to him. And he carried them with him into the 11th floor, the same way he carried everything deliberately without apology as data that was part of the complete picture of who he was. Sears arrived on Wednesday. He showed up at the door of Darius's office, a real office with a window and a desk and a whiteboard and a chair that was not a folding chair, with a box of his personal belongings from his old desk in Harrington's department, and an expression that was trying to be professional and not quite succeeding. So, Sears said, New team, put your stuff down. I want to walk you through what I'm thinking for the research program. Sears set the box down. He looked around the office. He looked at the whiteboard which Darius had already covered with diagrams and notation from the previous 2 days. Did you sleep this week? Some. Are you ready to work? I've been ready to work for 2 years. Sears pulled up a chair. Show me. They worked through the afternoon without stopping. Darius laid out the framework for the new systems development program, not just the Vortex 7 next generation, but a broader research agenda that he'd been forming in the back of his mind since the moment the Stage 4 compression had held, and he'd understood with the clarity of a system finally running clean that the solution he'd found was not an endpoint, but a beginning. Sears asked good questions, hard questions, the kind that found the weaknesses in a plan before the plan became a commitment. Darius answered them directly, revised where revision was warranted, held firm where the logic held firm. By 6 o'clock, the whiteboard was covered on both sides. Sears leaned back in his chair and looked at it. This is a 2-year program minimum. Probably 3. You're building a department. I'm building a department. What do you need from me specifically? Darius looked at him. I need you to be the engineer you were in that lab, not the engineer you were in Harrington's conference room, the one who ran the simulation at midnight because he needed to know if the answer was right, not because anyone asked him to. He held Sears's gaze. I don't need people who perform competence. I need people who have it. Sears was quiet for a moment. I can do that. I know. That's why you're here. Tug. Gerald Hodges found out about the reclassification on a Thursday morning. He was sitting at his desk in the maintenance office, working through the week's work orders, with his reading glasses on the chain around his neck when HR sent the notification. He read it twice. He took his glasses off. He put them back on and read it a third time. Then he called Darius's cell. What did you do? Read the notification. I read it. I'm asking you what you did. I told someone who had the authority to fix it that it needed to be fixed. That's all. A long silence. Darius, I don't need. Gerald, you have been doing a senior management job with a maintenance supervisor title for 10 years. Your department runs better than any department in this building. You have never once asked for anything. You have never once complained. You have just done the work. He paused. The work you do deserves to be recognized as what it actually is. That's not charity. That's accuracy. Another silence. When Gerald spoke again, his voice was different. Not broken. Gerald Hodges was not a man given to breaking, but different in the way that voices get different when something true and overdue has finally been said out loud. You didn't have to do that. No, I wanted to. A beat. How's Maya? She's good. The surgical consult is next week. Dr. Okafor at St. Marcus. He's the best pediatric cardiologist in the Southeast, apparently. Good. Another beat. You got the noodles. Every Friday now. It's become a tradition. Gerald made the sound he made when he was satisfied with something. A short, quiet exhale through the nose. The sound of a man who has seen enough of the world to know that good things are not guaranteed and to take genuine pleasure in them when they arrive. You did good, son. He had never called Darius that before. Darius sat with it for a moment. I had help. You always do. The trick is knowing whose help to take. He hung up. 3 weeks into the new position, Richard Caulfield received Diane Park's initial filing. Darius knew the exact day it arrived because Diane called him at 8:15 in the morning with the specific contained satisfaction of a woman who has just executed something she has been building toward and wants to report the result. It was delivered to his office at Apex Industrial this morning. I received confirmation of receipt at 8:02. A pause. His attorney called our office at 8:11. 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Which tells you that either Caulfield reads his mail very fast, or he has been waiting for something like this for 7 years and recognized it immediately. What did the attorney say? He asked for a meeting. I said yes. The meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from Friday. Another pause. Darius. His attorney calling within 9 minutes is not the response of an innocent man trying to understand a filing he doesn't recognize. It is the response of a man who knows exactly what the filing is about and has already decided that settlement is preferable to discovery. Darius sat with that for a moment. 7 years. He had carried this for 7 years. The anger of it, the injustice of it, the specific particular exhaustion of knowing something was true and having nobody with the power to do anything about it, believe you, or being willing to try. He had carried it while Angela was sick. He had carried it while she died. He had carried it through the maintenance job and the insurance denial and the 447 alarm and the lunch notes folded into triangles. And now a man in Houston had received a piece of paper and called a lawyer in 9 minutes. Diane. Yes. Make sure the documentation package we submit for discovery includes the complete record, every timestamp, every access log, every revision. He paused. And the 4 patents he filed after mine, all of them. Already in the package. Good. One more thing. I sent a courtesy copy of the initial filing to the engineering press. 2 trade publications. Not the details, just the fact of the filing and its general subject matter. She paused. You should know that by tomorrow morning, the industry will be aware that a patent dispute involving Meridian Dynamics and a former employee is in progress. He was quiet for a moment. Is that standard practice? It is not unstandard, and it is in my judgment appropriate. What happened to you did not happen only to you. It happened to every engineer who might have worked with Caulfield after you. The industry has a right to know there is an open question about his record. Another pause. But I wanted you to know before it appeared. Thank you. Of course. A beat. How are you doing with all of this? I thought about the question. He was sitting at his desk on the 11th floor of a building he had entered through the loading dock 2 years and 3 months ago. Through the window, Atlanta was doing what it always did, indifferent and magnificent. On his desk was a photograph, Maya and Gerald the rabbit, taken the previous Saturday at the park. Maya's face in full, unguarded happiness, Gerald propped in the crook of her arm. I'm doing okay, he said. I'm actually doing okay. He meant it completely. He had said those words before in the car after the test, and meant them tentatively as a hope, as a direction, as a thing he was pointing himself toward. Now he meant them as a fact. Good, Diane said. Hold on to that. The next few months are going to require it. Maya's surgical consultation was on a Tuesday. Darius took the morning off, which he had never done in 2 years. 3 months of the maintenance job, and had not done in his 3 weeks in the new position either. He asked for it from Vanessa directly in person, standing in her office doorway with his jacket on. Maya's consult, St. Marcus, Tuesday morning. Of course, take whatever you need. I'll be in by 1. Darius, take the day. He looked at her. I'll be in by 1, he said. I don't want the whole day. I want the morning to be about Maya and the afternoon to be normal. Normal is good for her. Normal is good for me. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. You are the most stubborn man I have ever negotiated with. I've been told. I'm going to take that as a compliment on your behalf. It is one. She looked at him with an expression that had become over 3 weeks slightly more legible to him, a face that had learned to let things through that it previously managed from a greater distance. The specific expression of a person who has encountered someone they didn't expect to encounter and is still quietly adjusting. How is she, Maya? She's good. She told me this morning that Gerald the rabbit is also coming to the consultation because he has a heart condition. Something happened in Vanessa's expression. The professional surface and the human surface converged for a moment. She's wonderful. Yes, she is. He went to the consultation. Dr. Okafor was a tall Ghanaian-American man in his late 40s with large hands and the specific unhurried quality of someone who has decided that the pace of a conversation with a frightened parent is not something to be rushed. He sat across from Darius in an office that was not beige, that had actual plants in it, and a framed drawing on the wall that was clearly made by a child. And he talked about Maya's condition, the way doctors talk when they respect the person they're talking to. Completely without softening the difficult parts, without overselling the easy ones. Maya sat next to Darius in her own chair. A real chair, not a child's chair, because she had refused the child's chair in the waiting room, with the specific quiet dignity of a person who knows her own mind, and listened with the complete, uninterrupting attention she had given Darius's story about the machine. When the doctor finished, she spoke before Darius did. Will it hurt? The procedure. There will be some discomfort, yes. But we'll make sure you're very comfortable. You'll be asleep for the part that matters. Will Gerald be allowed in the room? Dr. Okafor looked at the rabbit who was sitting in Maya's lap with his remaining eye regarding the doctor with the serene authority of a medical professional assessing a colleague. I think we can make an exception for Gerald, he said. Maya nodded, satisfied. She looked at her father. He looked back at her. In her face, he saw Angela. Not painfully, not the way he sometimes saw it, the way that caught him off guard and sat on his chest. He saw it the way he'd been learning slowly to see it, as continuance, as the thing that persists, as evidence that love, when it's real, doesn't end when the person does. It just finds a new face to live in. He reached over and took her hand. She let him hold it, which she didn't always do in public because she was 6 and had opinions about independence. Today she let him hold it. They sat there together in an office with plants and a child's drawing on the wall, while Dr. Okafor explained the future in clear, careful language. And outside the window, the city went about its business, and somewhere in the building, a machine was running perfectly, and in a law office downtown, a filing was working its way toward a reckoning that was 7 years overdue. Darius Coleman held his daughter's hand, and he thought, this is the thing that was worth all of it. Not the job, not the vindication, not the green status light, or the investor's stunned face, or Harrington's admission, or Caulfield's lawyer calling in 9 minutes. This. A Tuesday morning. A good doctor. A rabbit with one eye. And a little girl who had never once stopped believing he would fix it. Maya's surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in March. The night before, Darius didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, though he was in the specific cellular way that parents are afraid of things that involve their children, and anesthesia, and surgical instruments, and the particular vulnerability of a small body on a table. He didn't sleep because he couldn't locate the off switch for his mind, which had decided that this night of all nights was the appropriate time to run a full inventory of every decision he had ever made, every turn he had taken or failed to take, every moment in the chain of events that had delivered him to this specific place in his life. He lay on his back in the dark and looked at the ceiling. The water stain was still there, the one that looked like a handprint. He had never gotten around to fixing it, partly because there was always something more urgent, and partly because it had become over 3 years of looking at it in the dark, a kind of companion. Proof that he had been here. That he had lain in this room and thought about his daughter, and his work, and his wife, and the weight of everything the world had put on him, and had gotten up anyway, morning after morning, because getting up was the only option that led anywhere worth going. At 2:30 in the morning, his phone buzzed. He picked it up. A text from a number he didn't immediately recognize, and then did Patrick Sears. Can't sleep either. The Q3 damping variance report is going to need another pass. Just FYI. Also, good luck tomorrow. Maya's going to be fine. He looked at the message for a moment. He typed back, "Go to sleep, Sears." The reply came in 30 seconds. "You first." He put the phone down. Something in him had shifted, small, almost imperceptible, but real. The particular warmth of being known by someone who didn't have to know you. Sears had no obligation to think about Maya's surgery at 2:30 in the morning. He had thought about it anyway. He had sent a message anyway. That was the thing about building something real with people, it grew edges you didn't plan for. Good edges. The kind that held you when you needed holding. He closed his eyes. He thought about Angela. He did this, sometimes not with grief, not anymore. Not in the sharp, breathtaking way that grief operates in the first years. He did it the way you think about someone who is permanently part of you, who exists in a different form now, but has not stopped existing. He thought about her hands. About the way she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. About the night Maya was born, the specific quality of the light in the delivery room. The way Angela had looked at him afterward, exhausted and radiant, and more herself than he had ever seen her be. I thought about what she would say to him tonight. She would say, "Stop looking at the ceiling. The ceiling isn't going to change. Maya is going to be fine. Go to sleep." He smiled in the dark. He went to sleep. Dr. Okafor came out of the operating room at 11:47 in the morning. Darius was standing when the door opened. He had been sitting in the waiting area for 3 hours and 20 minutes, and had stood up approximately 40 minutes ago because sitting had stopped being something his body was capable of. I was standing with Gerald the rabbit in his hands, which he had been holding since Maya handed the rabbit to him outside the operating room, with the gravity of a commanding officer entrusting a subordinate with something of the highest strategic importance. Keep him safe. He gets scared when I'm not there. I'll keep him safe. She had looked at him one more time before they took her through the door. That direct, undeflected gaze, the one that saw everything and settled it into fact. I'll see you when I wake up. I'll be right here. With Gerald. With Gerald. She went through the door. He had stood in the corridor for a full minute after it closed, holding a one-eyed rabbit before he went to find the waiting area. Now Dr. Okafor was walking toward him with the measured pace of a man who has learned that the way he moves in these moments tells the family everything before he opens his mouth. He was moving steadily. He was not rushing. His expression was not closed. Darius watched him cross the room and understood before a single word was spoken that Maya was alive and that it had gone well. The understanding arrived in his body before it arrived in his mind. A physical release. A loosening of something that had been held so tightly and for so long that he hadn't been aware of how much tension it had required until it was no longer necessary. Dr. Okafor stopped in front of him. She's out. Everything went exactly as planned. The procedure was textbook. The structural repair is clean. The tissue response is excellent. She's in recovery now, and she's already asked for juice and for you in that order. Darius nodded. He nodded because speaking was not immediately available. The prognosis from here is very good. We'll monitor closely for the next 6 months, but the underlying condition has been corrected. Her heart is going to work the way it's supposed to work. Dr. Okafor paused. She's going to be okay, Mr. Coleman. Your daughter is going to be okay. Darius looked at the man in front of him. He had spent 14 months living with those words as a destination. He was trying to reach as a thing he was working toward, as the goal that structured every decision he made, and every morning he got up for. He had imagined hearing them in many different ways. He had not imagined that when he finally heard them, He would be standing in a hospital waiting room, holding a one-eyed stuffed rabbit, and that the hearing of them would feel less like an arrival than like the moment a machine finally runs clean, quiet, complete, unspectacular in the best possible way. He reached out and shook Dr. Okafor's hand. "Thank you." 2 words. The same 2 words he had said to Vanessa Whitmore in her office, with the same weight and the same simplicity and the same complete, unornamented meaning. Dr. Okafor held his hand for a moment. "She told me when we were getting her ready that her daddy fixes things." A pause. She wasn't wrong. Maya's recovery room was small and smelled like antiseptic, and had a television mounted on the wall that she was not watching because she was busy holding court. She was propped against 2 pillows, pale and slightly groggy from the anesthesia. Gerald restored to his position in the crook of her arm, and she was talking to the recovery nurse with the focused conversational energy of a child who has woken up from a nap and has things to say. When Darius came through the door, she stopped mid-sentence and looked at him with those eyes. Angela's eyes, his whole world, and her face did the thing it always did when she saw him. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Maya, in the slightly slurred, serious voice of a person who is still partially under the influence of anesthesia and is doing her best to be coherent. "Daddy," Gerald was scared. "I know. I held him the whole time." "Was he good?" "He was very good. He didn't complain once." She looked at the rabbit, then back at him. "Are you crying?" I was in fact crying. Not dramatically. Just the specific quiet kind of crying that happens when a body releases something. It has been holding for a very long time, when the physical fact of relief moves through a person in the only language the body knows. "A little." "Why?" He looked at her. This small, certain miraculous person. "Because I'm happy." She considered this with the seriousness that anesthesia and 6-year-old logic applied equally to everything. "Happy crying is okay," she concluded. "Mrs. Archer does it at church." He laughed. A real laugh, sudden and full. The kind of laugh that comes from the same place as the crying from the same release, the same overflow. "Yeah," he said. "Happy crying is okay." He held her hand. She fell back asleep within 4 minutes, still holding Gerald, her breathing already different, quieter. More even, the particular quality of a body that has been fixed and is settling into what fixed feels like. He sat beside her and listened to it, and did not move for a very long time. The Meridian settlement came 6 weeks later. Diane Park called him on a Wednesday afternoon from outside the meeting room, where the final terms had just been agreed to, and she spoke in the same measured, organized sentences as always, but with a current running underneath them that he recognized as satisfaction. The specific satisfaction of a person who has spent months building something and has just watched it hold. "Richard Caulfield has agreed to a full settlement. The terms include the correction of patent record on the original filing and 2 subsequent filings to reflect your authorship. A financial settlement that I am not permitted to disclose in full, but which is substantial. A written statement for the industry record, acknowledging the circumstances of the dispute and his resignation from Apex Industrial, which was a condition imposed by Apex's board rather than by us, once the documentation was disclosed to them internally." Darius was at his desk on the 11th floor. He was looking at the whiteboard, which was covered in the current iteration of the research program. 2 months of work building steadily the shape of something real, emerging from the accumulated intelligence of people who were for the first time in some of their careers being asked to do exactly what they were capable of. He set down the marker he'd been holding. "The patent corrections. What's the timeline?" "The USPTO filing will be updated within 30 days. Your name will be restored as primary inventor on the original patent and listed as co-inventor on the 2 subsequent filings that were derived from your work." He was quiet for a moment. "Diane, the written statement. The one for the industry record. Who sees it? We've agreed it will be submitted to the 3 major engineering trade publications, as well as filed publicly with the patent correction. It will be visible to anyone who searches your name or Caulfield's name or the patent numbers in question." A pause. "Darius, anyone who looks you up from this point forward will find the full story, both sides of it." He looked at the whiteboard. 7 years. He had carried the weight of a stolen story for 7 years, carried it in silence because he didn't have the resources to make it loud, because the world had arranged itself in a way that made his version of events easy to dismiss, and Caulfield's version easy to accept. He had watched his own work credited to someone else. He had watched his own career dismantled, while the man who dismantled it continued to build on the foundation he had stolen. And now the record would be corrected. Not undone. You couldn't undo 7 years, couldn't restore what Angela had lived through. Couldn't give back the mornings and the tool bag, and the 447 alarm, and the 2 years of light fixtures and generator inspections. You couldn't make the loss unhappened. But you could make the truth visible. You could put the correct name on the correct work. You could make it so that anyone who looked would find the real story. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything he had asked for. "Thank you," he said. "Tell Vanessa." "She already knows. She was in the building." He paused. "She was there." She asked to observe. Caulfield's attorney was not pleased, but she had every legal right to be present as a supporting party to the filing. A beat. She sat in the back of the room for 4 hours and did not say a single word. He sat with that for a moment. Vanessa Whitmore had sat in a settlement meeting for 4 hours and said nothing because she wanted to be there and understood that being there was enough, that her presence was its own form of statement, that some things you show up for, not because your presence changes anything, but because showing up is what bearing witness looks like. "Tell her I'll see her tomorrow." "She said she'll be in early." He hung up. He stood up from his desk and walked to the whiteboard and stood in front of it. The diagrams and the notation and the months of accumulated thinking laid out in dry erase marker the shape of the work he was building. He picked up the marker. He wrote his name in the corner of the whiteboard where engineers sign work they claim. D. Coleman. He looked at it for a moment. Then he went back to work. The elevator thing happened on a Thursday morning in April. He had been in the position for 5 months. The research program had grown to 7 people. Sears 4 engineers. Darius had recruited from outside the company with the specific mix of technical ability and intellectual honesty he'd been looking for, and 2 internal transfers who had, in Gerald Hodges' phrase, been doing senior work with junior titles for longer than was fair. The Vortex 7 Next Generation project was 8 weeks ahead of schedule. Vanessa had told him in their weekly meeting that 2 of the 3 remaining investor groups had increased their commitments based on the program's early output. Howe was carrying coffee and a folder of design specs and waiting for the elevator on 11 when it opened, and Harrington stepped out. They hadn't spoken much since the lab. Not because of tension exactly. The tension had resolved itself somewhere in the weeks following the test, in the specific way that tension resolves when the underlying question has been answered definitively and both parties understand that the argument is over. They moved through the building with the mutual respect of people who have assessed each other under pressure and arrived at accurate conclusions. Harrington stopped when he saw him, looked at the folder in Darius's hand. Q3 compression variance. You've seen it. Sears sent me a copy. Thought I might have useful input on the simulation parameters. He paused. He was right. The frequency banding in the secondary test range, there's a correlation with the original Vortex 7 failure data that might be relevant. Darius looked at him. Come to the 11 o'clock. Harrington nodded once. The nod of a man who has made peace with something that required real effort and intends to honor that peace by being useful. I'll be there. He got back in the elevator. The doors closed. Darius stood in the corridor for a moment. I thought about the first day. The conference room. The laughter. The specific contempt in Harrington's voice when he said someone in a maintenance role, the words chosen carefully enough to say everything he meant without saying it directly. The particular sophistication of a prejudice that knows how to dress itself up. I thought about where they were now. 2 men standing in a corridor talking about frequency banding and simulation parameters. The ordinary language of people who work together towards something real. This was not a small thing. This was in fact exactly the thing. The proof that what had happened was not just about one machine being fixed and one man getting a better job. It was about what happened when the world was forced to look at someone it had decided not to see and was forced to revise. It was about what becomes possible when the system that broke someone is made to sit with the evidence of who that person actually was. Systems could change. Not easily. Not without pressure. Not without someone standing in a boardroom and saying, "Put it in writing," with a worn insurance letter in his pocket, and a daughter at home, and every reason in the world to look at his feet, and every ounce of who he was refusing to do it. But they could change. He had the proof of it in his own life in the 11 o'clock meeting that was about to include a man who had once laughed at him in the settlement that had put his name back on his work in the surgeon who had fixed his daughter's heart. He pressed the elevator button and went downstairs to get more coffee. The article ran in Engineering Monthly on a Friday in May. Diane had told him it was coming, but seeing it was different from knowing it was coming. He was at his desk when his phone started moving. Texts, emails, notifications from a professional network he had largely abandoned 7 years ago and had quietly rejoined in the months since the settlement. The messages came from people he had worked with before Meridian, from people he had never met who had encountered the article and followed the thread back to his name, from 2 former colleagues who had always known that what Caulfield said had happened was not what had happened, and who had not had the standing or the resources to say so publicly until now. The article was titled, "The Engineer Who Disappeared: How a Patent Dispute Erased a Career and What Happened When He Fixed a billion-dollar Machine from a Maintenance Cart." He read the first 2 paragraphs. Then he stopped reading. Not because it was wrong, because it was accurate, and accurate was enough. He didn't need to read his own story. He had lived it. He set the phone face down on his desk. He looked out the window at Atlanta. Then Vanessa was at his doorway. She didn't knock. She rarely knocked, which he had come to understand as a specific form of respect. The respect of someone who treats your space as a place of work rather than a place of separation. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed and looked at him with the expression that had become over these months. Simply her expression when she was looking at him, direct, honest, containing something that neither of them had named and both of them understood. "Have you read it?" "The first 2 paragraphs. It's good. It's accurate." She paused. "Your phone is going to be busy today." "It already is." "Do you need anything?" He looked at her. This woman who had said, "Fix it, and I'm yours," as a throwaway challenge in a room full of people who were laughing, and had then spent the better part of a year making sure that every promise embedded in those words, every implication of respect and recognition and restitution, was honored completely. "No," he said. "I have everything I need." She nodded. She started to turn away, stopped. "Darius, for what it's worth, and I know it doesn't undo anything, and I know I'm not the one who owes you the apology. I'm glad the hallway door was open that day." He looked at her. "So am I." She left. He turned back to his desk. He picked up the marker. He looked at the whiteboard. His name was still in the corner where he'd written it 6 weeks ago. D. Coleman. He turned to the design file on his screen, the next generation compression system, the one that built on everything the Vortex 7 had taught them, the one that was going to be if the early data held something genuinely new in the field. He had been working on it for 5 months. It was his best work. He knew it the way you know things that come from a place deeper than training from the part of yourself that existed before the world told you what you were worth. He started working. 6 months after Maya's surgery, Dr. Okafor cleared her for full activity. Darius took the afternoon off. He was better at taking afternoons off now. Slightly, though it still required conscious effort, and picked Maya up from school early, which she registered with the raised eyebrow expression of a child who understands that early pickup means something is happening. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere." That's not an answer. It's a partial answer. She considered this. Accepted it with the pragmatism of someone who has learned that partial answers from her father usually lead somewhere worth going. They went to the park where they'd gone the weekend after the machine test, the same park, the same path, the same bench near the fountain where he'd sat and watched her run and felt for the first time in a long time that something was going to be okay. It was a warm afternoon. The city was doing what warm afternoon cities do, filling up with people who had remembered that the outside exists and had decided to use it. Children on the path. A man with a very old dog. Two women at the fountain eating lunch. Maya ran. Not from anything, not toward anything in particular, just ran the way children run when they have been given open space and permission and functioning hearts with the pure kinetic joy of a body that works and knows it. She ran down the path and back arms out, hair flying. Gerald tucked under one arm with the determined expression of a rabbit who has been in surgery and come through it and intends to keep up. Darius sat on the bench and watched her. I thought about a morning 2 years and 8 months ago before Whitmore Technologies, before the conference room, before the 5 days in the lab, and the green status light, and Diane Park, and Richard Caulfield's lawyer, calling in 9 minutes. A morning when he woke at 4:47, and made coffee, and packed a lunch, and wrote a note folded into a triangle, and went to replace a light fixture on the 14th floor. Because that was what the work order said, and because the work order was what he had. He thought about the man he had been on that morning, not diminished. He was careful about that. Careful not to look back on the maintenance years as lesser, as shameful as the part of the story that had to be escaped. Gerald Hodges ran a good department, and Darius had been part of it, and that was real work and real life and real dignity, and he carried it with him, and he would always carry it with him. But he had been hiding. Not intentionally, not completely, but hiding in the way that people hide when the world has punished them enough times for being visible. That invisibility starts to feel like safety. Howe was not hiding anymore. His name was on his work. His daughter was running in the sun with a one-eyed rabbit. His department was building something that was going to matter. The record was corrected. The truth was visible. And somewhere in Houston, a man who had spent 7 years building on a stolen foundation was sitting with the consequences of that. Maya ran, back to him out of breath, collapsing onto the bench beside him with the dramatic abandon of a child who has used everything she has and is not sorry about it. Daddy. Yeah. Do you like your new job? He looked at her. Yes, I really do. Do the people there know you're the best? I thought about Sears at 2:30 in the morning, texting about damping variance reports and Maya's surgery with equal concern. He thought about Harrington walking into the 11 o'clock meeting with the Vortex 7 failure data and the particular dignity of a man honoring a revised understanding of himself. He thought about Gerald Hodges reading the reclassification notification with his glasses on their chain and the way his voice had sounded when he said, "You did good, son." He thought about Vanessa saying, "I'm glad the hallway door was open." Some of them, he said. The ones that matter. Maya nodded, looked at Gerald, adjusted his position. Gerald thinks you're the best. I know. Gerald has excellent judgment. She leaned against his arm. She was warm from running, and she smelled like sunshine and the particular detergent he'd used on her jacket since she was a baby, because she'd never had a reaction to it, and he'd never seen a reason to change. He put his arm around her. They sat on the bench together in the warm afternoon, father and daughter and a one-eyed rabbit, while Atlanta moved around them in its ordinary, indifferent, magnificent way. I thought about what it had cost. Everything it had cost, the years, the work, the wife he had lost, the career that had been taken, the mornings that had required everything he had just to begin. He thought about the weight of it, the specific and unignorable weight of being a black man in America, trying to claim space in a world that had decided before he opened his mouth that his space was elsewhere. He did not think any of it was okay. He did not think the system that had made it necessary was acceptable, or that the men who had benefited from his invisibility deserved to go without consequence, or that the story of Darius Coleman was exceptional, because most men in his position didn't get a hallway with an open door and a CEO who chose to listen. He thought about all of that clearly and without flinching, because he was a man who looked at things as they were and not as he wished them to be. And then he looked at his daughter leaning against his arm. And he thought, and yet, here we are. A man who was invisible became visible. A name that was erased was restored. A machine that was broken was fixed. A heart that was struggling was repaired. A little girl who breathed too loud on a monitor was running in the sun. And yet, some things do get fixed. Not all things, not easily, not without cost. But some things, the ones you refuse to stop working on, the ones you push through a closed door and demand to be heard about, the ones you put in writing and carry in your pocket next to your heartbeat, until the world catches up with what you've known all along. Some things get fixed. Darius Coleman had known how to fix things since he was 9 years old in a Baltimore basement with $17 and a failed capacitor and a mother who had stopped expecting anything to get better. He had never stopped knowing it. The world had tried more than once to make him forget. He had remembered anyway. And that all of it, the whole weight and the whole arc and the whole hard-won, expensive, irreversible truth of it, was something no one would ever be able to take from him again.